This is a tutorial on the dose calibrator QC. This is a CRC 55TW Cap and Tech, and it has a well counter and a dose calibrator connected to it. This is inside of a pet lab. And so what we're going to do first of all is go through the daily QC. You're going to check the background. Remove all sources from the chamber, make sure there are no sources, and then you hit continue. It's going to measure the background. Okay, once that's done, you hit OK. And then you can go back. Background is done. Now you want to check your chamber volts. That's going to tell you the high voltage supply to the chamber. Remember, it has to operate in the right voltage with the voltage response curve. It has to be in the right section of that. And for a dose calibrator, it's typically between 140 and 160 volts. This one is 155.8. That should stay pretty stable for this device, and it shouldn't fluctuate. Any fluctuations in the voltage can change the ability for it to read accurately. Okay, so that's done. We say okay. We go back. And then now we want to do our daily QC. You notice it has the ability to do other things like accuracy right here on the bottom menu. But we want to go to the daily QC. So we've removed all sources from the chamber. And this is the well on the dose calibrator. Usually just sits on your counter, but because this is a pet department and the pet radionuclides have the ability to pass right through the gas chamber because of radiation safety reasons and extra shielding, it's best practice to have it tucked down into the counter where it's more of a lead-lined counter. So we've removed all sources from the chamber. We say okay. That's going to automatically zero it. It's going to basically erase that background activity that it measured and put it back at 0. So we say okay. Now it's going to measure the background again. It's done. We say okay. Now it's checking the chamber voltage, and it should come back up to 155.8, and it did. Data check okay. And now we're going to move on. All right, so I'm going to say home. We're back because we don't want it to actually do an accuracy. Those are done annually, and if you notice, it just is kind of going across the menu here. So what we're going to do for the constancy is we will put our cesium source in there, and we will measure it on each isotope selector button. Okay. So now that we've done our background, we checked the chamber volts, we're going to go ahead and put our cesium in the well. And I want to hold this up just to let you know this is cesium 137. About 200 microcuries is pretty normal, and it is typical to have it in a vial source like this. You don't want to really hold it like I am. You want to just go ahead and drop it in. Make sure that the dipper is all the way down. And it's first going to tell you cesium. It's on cesium. And then this is how you would select each radionuclide. So I'll go back to cesium where it was. So this right here is telling you which radionuclide it is in the half-life. You want to give it a minute to kind of settle down so it can read accurately, but it's 208 microcuries on cesium. And then you just go right down each of these radionuclides that you use every day, and it's going to tell you about what it is. So notice I changed it to F18, and it tells you the half-life is 1.83 hours. It's always going to fluctuate a little bit. You don't want to wait for it to stop, because it's never going to stop. It's constantly counting how many ionizations are happening within that chamber. So it's normal for it to fluctuate a little bit. You just want to record what's close or what's happening most frequently. This one is about 121.1 or 121.2 most frequently, so that would be the one that we record. And then you go down to the next one on the list, which is gallium. Tells you the half-life of that one is 3.6 days. And that is 351 microcuries. Now we're going to go down to indium. And that's going to tell us it's 167.2-ish microcuries. Indium half-life 2.8 days. And you'll notice that we put cesium in the well. I never changed the source. That's still cesium in there. And as we're going through, it's telling us a different amount of activity for the different radionuclides that we're selecting. So now I have it on technetium. It's telling us it's 395 microcuries of cesium, or I'm sorry, 395 microcuries of technetium. We only put 200-ish microcuries of cesium in there. That's what's in there. But when we tell the dose calibrator that it's reading technetium, it's coming up with a different amount. That's because the instrument has calculations programmed into it. It doesn't know which radionuclide is in there. It can't identify that. What it's doing is measuring the amount of ionizations that are happening within the chamber. And then based on the radionuclide that you told it was in the chamber and the half-life and basic physics components of that radionuclide, it's telling you if that many ionizations are happening at a given time within the chamber, then it must be 394 microcuries of tech. And you know, indium has a longer half-life. Indium has a different decay. So indium came up as 167. So if you're doing the constancy, that's all you do is go through these different isotope selector buttons and record what it tells you at each one. It should be fairly consistent. Some places prefer 5% difference. Some places are okay with 10%. You don't want it to go outside of that range. That tells you there's something wrong with the instrument. If all of them are off, it's probably an issue with the high voltage supply or the power supply. If only one radionuclide is off and the rest of them aren't, then it's probably something to do with the conversion that the instrument is doing for that radionuclide. So it just needs recalibrated for that radionuclide. Now, if they're off, you can't use the dose calibrator until it gets fixed. If it's only one, then you can use everything else and just not that one. But if it's all of them, then you can't use the dose calibrator until you get service. All right, that's how you do constancy. When you're done, you always want to make sure that you remove the source, put it back in the lead vial, and usually this is stored in a lead-lined cabinet or behind the L block. This one is stored behind the L block. Put the dipper back in, make sure there's no sources or contamination. This is reading about what it was at background before we started, so that's okay. And then you want to put it back on the isotope that it was on before, or whatever isotope you use most often. So most times in a regular department, you'll put it at technetium. In this department, they mostly is a PET department, so we'll put it at F18 or we'll put it back at cesium.